Hi, I'm Darren, and welcome to Level Up EE Lab. This is the third episode on the repair and restoration project I'm doing on this Viking Adventurer transmitter, and I've clearly gotten into the disassembly. Let's see what I found. Alright, now that I know the transformer and other critical items in the rig seem to be still working okay, I can begin the disassembly. And as typical, disassembly basically just follows the reverse of the assembly process, so that means starting with removing the front panel items. Knobs, meters, and other user controls all came off without a fight. I'll set them aside to be cleaned later. Next up is stripping down the chassis. And before I started removing items, I took some reference video and photographs. I do have the Johnson assembly manual, but having a record of how this unit was actually built will also come in really handy. The majority of the wiring I'm just cutting instead of desoldering. I'm gonna just replace it all anyway. The only exceptions are the DC choke and AC transformer leads. I'm desoldering all of those because cutting them might accidentally make them too short to reattach later. And speaking of the DC choke, there was a lot of that residue under it. In fact, there was so much that it basically glued the choke to the chassis. It looks like some kind of wax. Maybe there was wax in the choke or in the transformer that leaked out, but they'd have to really overheat for quite a while, I would think, in order for any wax inside to melt and flow out. But that's the best guess I can make anyway. At any rate, it only took me about an hour to carefully strip the rig down to the final item, the power transformer. And as I mentioned earlier, I desoldered it instead of cutting all of its leads. And with it now out of the way, I can get a good look at just how much cleaning this chassis is going to need. This burned residue on the bottom side is probably going to fight me, but up top side, other than this wax, most of the rest just looks like ordinary grime accumulation. The label is still mostly intact, but I haven't yet been able to read the serial number. It's pretty badly faded. I'll start with my usual application of diluted super clean. That's my gold standard cleaner as far as I'm concerned for removing oily residue. But if it won't work on this waxy gunk, I'll try some WD-40. The main ingredient in it is mineral spirits, and that's usually a great solvent to take off tenacious hydrocarbons like adhesives and waxes. But before I jump into cleaning the chassis, let's take a look at all the major components. Each one of these items will need a more detailed cleaning and inspection, and I'll be going through them individually as I do the work. Now, just to make sure you guys are really paying attention, there's one item I've snuck into this group that doesn't belong in a Viking Adventurer. Can you identify it? This Adventurer turned out to be really easy to strip down to a bare chassis, and I definitely made the right decision versus trying to restore it and repair it while keeping it intact. And I do happen to have the original assembly manual that my dad saved, and even though it's not as thoroughly detailed as Heathkit's from that era, there's still sufficient information and step-by-step instructions in here to make me confident that I'll get it back together correctly. For rewiring, I'm going to use new silicone insulated 22 gauge solid wire, and I've got 6 colors to choose from, so I'll use some logical assignment for each of the colors. Maybe black for the line voltage that's coming into it, and then red for all the high voltage circuits, and so on. But I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. There's still a lot of cleaning to do on all these individual parts, starting with the chassis. Here it is after washing. I cleaned it in my laundry tub, and trust me, that would not have made for good video. And as I feared, that waxy residue was very stubborn. I did end up using WD-40 along with Super Clean, and together they managed to get it off. But there's still stains on both the top side and on the inside, plus quite a few scratches that are going to need to be mechanically removed. So I did some experimenting on some scrap aluminum, and I discovered that a 3-step wet sanding process starting with 600 grit sandpaper, followed by 2 progressively finer Scotch-Brite pads, did a really good job of removing stains and restoring a satin finish. I used the sandpaper and pads with soapy water, and I applied light pressure and a circular motion. I decided to try this method on the RF shield first. It also has some stubborn baked-on stains that just would not come off with the Super Clean. And here's what it looks like now after my process. That's much better, and it's pretty close now to what new aluminum sheet stock looks like. I was now optimistic that this process would remove all of the discoloration from the chassis. And it did. It looks magnitudes better now. There's still some deeper scratches here and there, but most of these are hidden by other components anyway. I'm really happy with how much better the chassis looks now, and I was able to work around the label and keep it intact. Moving right along, I need to tackle the individual parts now, starting with the antenna connector. Mechanically, it appears sound, but it's got a lot of corrosion products on it. These are typically silver plated, so those corrosion products are mostly silver sulfide. I found the aluminum foil and baking soda method works very well to remove them as long as you use hot water. A lot of that gas is hydrogen sulfide, a byproduct of converting the silver sulfide to aluminum sulfide. And here's what it looks like afterwards. Much better. Maybe not as pretty as a new one, but as I've stated on some of my other projects, finding mechanically solid new UHF connectors nowadays is a total crapshoot. Most of them are just plain junk. Next is the 807 socket. And like the antenna connector, it also appears to be silver plated and thus has a lot of tarnish. Now I could probably clean it with the same method, but it's got a more serious problem. 2 of the backing springs are missing. Those springs are necessary to maintain contact pressure, and without them, those 2 pins are likely to go open circuit intermittently during operation. The quickest solution is to just replace the socket. And surprisingly, they're still available brand new. The one I bought has no trademark name on it, so that makes me a bit nervous. Also, the terminals look very shiny, which is sometimes a tip-off for poor solderability ahead. So I'll hold on to the old one for now just in case. And since I'm on a roll here, I also decided to replace the 4 octal sockets in the rig. 2 are used for the 5U4G and the 6AG7, the other 2 are used for the rear accessory connection and for the front panel socket for the crystal and VFO inputs. They've clearly been soldered and resoldered a bunch of times, and some of the pins are now loose enough to almost fall out. But no worries, these also are available brand new. The ones that I bought are made by Belton, and they seem to have a good quality reputation. The data sheet for them looks solid. They're stuffed with phosphor bronze terminals and are molded from glass-filled PPS. Now that's a plastic resin that I'm very familiar with. It's an excellent engineering polymer to use for high-temperature electrical connectors. The 3 air variable caps definitely need a good cleaning. They tend to collect a lot of dust and grime, especially those used in the high voltage circuit. Now I've heard that an ultrasound cleaner is the best way to clean them, but I don't have one, so it's just going to be super clean. But that does do an acceptable job, even on this fine pitched one. I will lube up the bearings with a little bit of Krytox to replace any grease that got washed out. There's plenty more parts that need attention, but I'm going to stop the cleaning for now with the terminal strips. Now some of these I could have just replaced with new ones, but a few of them like this one here are just not available new anywhere that I could find. And new old stock terminal strips, well, they tend to have very poor solderability because the tin plating tends to oxidize over time. So I'm just going to degrease these and remove the lingering bits of wire, and they should continue to work just fine. So in the next episode, I'll be into the assembly. And like I said, the parts I haven't cleaned yet, I'll just be doing those piecemeal as they're called for in the appropriate assembly step. As always, I thank you for watching my channel, and I do hope you're enjoying this series on this restoration of this Viking Adventurer transmitter. So until next time, bye for now.